All right, get ready because we are diving deep into something that could seriously level up your life. Crucial conversations.
Mm.
You guys gave us some really fascinating pieces from the book Crucial Conversations and some real-life stories that make this communication stuff way more real.
What's so cool is how broad this is. Like, we're not just talking about some high-stakes negotiation or a tense boardroom showdown.
Right.
It's about those everyday moments that can really make or break things.
Totally.
Relationships, careers, even your health.
Okay, so how does the book actually define a crucial conversation?
They break it down to three main things. You
Uh-huh.
got differing opinions, first of all, so you and the other person, you're not exactly seeing eye to eye.
Yeah.
Second, the stakes are high. This
Yeah.
isn't just small talk.
Like,
The outcome really matters. And third, emotions are running high. Think heated arguments, tense situations, where things are getting real.
okay, so not just like disagree on pizza toppings then.
Right, exactly.
They had a pretty good example in the book, right? Something about neighbors and a fence.
Oh, yeah. This one's almost funny.
Yeah.
Two neighbors are totally at odds over where their fence line is.
Right.
We're talking difference of like 3 inches,
Wow, that's...
but it gets so heated they're threatening to sue each other.
Oh my gosh.
And this is what makes these conversations so crucial, right? They can blow up and seriously impact your life.
Oh yeah. I can totally see myself messing up a fence line by like 3 inches.
Yeah, totally.
Okay, so we know that these conversations are important, but why are they so difficult? The book really digs into the science behind our struggles, and it's a little humbling.
Yeah, it is. It all comes down to how we're wired.
Yeah.
Basically, when we feel threatened or stressed, our brains like revert back to recess monkey mode.
Recess monkey, I like.
Right? It's like that fight or flight response.
Oh, yeah.
Adrenaline kicks in, blood rushes away from like your sophisticated thinking parts of your brain,
Okay.
and it goes towards your muscles, getting you ready to run or fight.
So basically, we're primed for a playground brawl, not a nuanced discussion.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay.
We literally lose access to our higher reasoning skills.
Wow.
No wonder things can go off the rails so quickly.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's not our fault, it's biology.
Okay.
But knowing this is the first step to overcoming it.
All right, so we're not doomed to forever be controlled by our inner recess monkeys.
No, definitely not.
But how does mastering these conversations actually lead to success in the real world?
So the book makes a really strong case backed up by research.
Okay.
They found that people who are good at handling these conversations, they have more influence at work, they perform better, and they build stronger relationships.
So this isn't just some touchy-feely self-help stuff. It's actually linked to real results.
Totally. Yeah. One study they talk about looked at high performers in 17 different organizations.
Wow, 17. Okay.
And what set these people apart was how consistently they used crucial conversation skills to deal with tough situations with their bosses, coworkers, everyone. They weren't avoiding conflict. They were actively engaging with it and coming out on top.
That's really interesting. And it makes sense.
Yeah.
Being able to tackle issues head-on is a big advantage in pretty much any field. The book even goes deeper and links successful conversations to improved safety
Right.
and performance in really high-stakes environments. Right?
Exactly. Yeah. Think about like nuclear power plants where clear communication about potential risks is absolutely essential.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Or hospitals where speaking up about concerns, even to, higher ups, can literally save lives.
Yeah.
In these cases, avoiding a tough conversation could have disastrous consequences.
Yeah, those are some really powerful examples. And it's not just about work, is it? The research shows a strong connection between relationship success and the ability to have these conversations.
Absolutely. Studies show that couples who can navigate tough conversations well are much less likely to be unhappy or break up. One study followed couples over 10 years,
Wow.
and they could predict almost 90% of the divorces just by watching how couples handled disagreements.
That's both fascinating and a little bit terrifying at the same time. But the good news is the research also showed that teaching couples these skills could really reduce the chances of unhappiness or divorce.
Exactly. It highlights that learning these skills can really impact the longevity and quality of our relationships.
And the part that just blew me away was the link between communication skills and personal health.
I know, it sounds wild, right?
Yeah.
But there's research that suggests that consistently avoiding or mishandling crucial conversations can weaken your immune system.
Really?
Oh.
So all those bottled up frustrations aren't just stressing us out, they could be affecting our physical well-being.
That's what the research suggests. And there's even a study with melanoma patients where those who learned good communication skills actually had a higher survival rate. It shows just how powerful these skills can be.
So it sounds like learning to have these conversations isn't just a good idea. It's essential if you want to improve your work, your relationships, and even your health.
Totally, yeah. The book argues that at the heart of a lot of persistent problems, whether it's at work, in teams, or our personal lives, there's a crucial conversation that we're either avoiding or messing up.
Okay, so we're convinced.
Good.
But how do we actually get better at this? The book talks about dialogue as being a key concept. What does that actually look like?
So dialogue is about creating this free flow of meaning between people. Imagine a space where everyone feels safe to share their honest thoughts and feelings, even when they disagree. It's not about suppressing differences, it's about understanding them.
So it's less about winning an argument and more about building understanding, even if you don't agree on everything.
Exactly.
Okay.
And this is where those silly games come, in the silence, passive aggression, the outright attacks.
Right.
We resort to those when we don't know how to have a healthy dialogue.
Yeah, we've all been there.
Exactly.
And the first step to breaking free from those games,
Yeah.
according to the book, is this idea of starting with heart. What does that even mean?
It's about taking a step back and getting clear on your own motives, like before you jump into a crucial conversation. Instead of just focusing on being right or winning, you ask yourself, what do I really want here? What's the best outcome for everyone, including myself?
So it's about taking responsibility for our own emotions and intentions rather than blaming the other person.
Exactly. And the book highlights two key principles within starting with heart.
Okay.
The first is about focusing on what you really want out of the conversation, understanding what truly matters to you, not just winning or being right.
That makes sense. I know sometimes I get so caught up in wanting to prove my point
Yeah,
that I lose sight of what I'm actually trying to achieve.
totally.
And the second principle.
The second one is about refusing the fool's choice. We often trap ourselves into thinking we have to choose between being honest and being respectful.
Oh, yeah.
But the book argues there's always a way to be both. It might take a little more effort and creativity,
Okay.
but it's always possible.
I love that. It's so easy to fall into that trap, thinking it's either. But there's usually a way to find a solution that honors both. They shared a story in the book about a CEO named Greta who chose this perfectly, right?
Oh yeah, Greta and the new office space.
Yes.
So she's leading her company through these cost cuts,
Right.
and then she gets called out for spending money on a fancy new office. In that moment, she could have easily gotten defensive and just shut down the conversation.
Oh, I totally would have. I can feel myself getting defensive just thinking about it.
Right, but instead she takes a breath, she acknowledges their concern.
Wow.
And she turns it into a productive conversation about how to move forward in a way that respects both saving money and employee well-being.
That's a really powerful example of how shifting our focus to what really matters can completely change a potentially bad conversation into a good one. It sounds like starting with heart is a foundational piece here.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
It sets the stage for everything else. And once your heart's in the right place, the next step is learning to look, to become aware of the risks in the conversation.
So this is about paying attention not just to the words being said, but to how people are feeling and reacting. Like picking up on those subtle cues that tell you when things are about to go wrong.
Yeah, exactly. It's like learning to fly fish. You can't just stare at the water hoping a fish will jump in your net.
Yeah.
You need to know what to look for, where they're hiding, and how to approach them without scaring them off.
I love that analogy. So what are some of the key things we should be watching for in a crucial conversation?
The book outlines three main things.
Okay.
First, recognizing when a conversation turns crucial. These are the moments when the stakes get higher, emotions start to flare, and there's more chance for conflict.
So it's like sensing that shift in the atmosphere.
Yeah.
Like when a casual disagreement starts to feel more serious.
Exactly. You'll feel your own heart rate increase. Maybe you'll notice their tone getting sharper or their body language getting more closed off. That's when you know to be extra careful.
Okay, and what's the second thing to watch for?
The second is recognizing when safety is at risk. This could look like fear, withdrawal, or even aggression.
Right.
People might get defensive, shut down, or even resort to personal attacks. That's a sign that the conversation is no longer a safe place for honest and open dialogue.
Okay, and the third thing?
The third one is understanding your own style under stress. How do you typically react when things get heated? Do you clam up and go silent, or do you get argumentative and aggressive?
Oh man, self-awareness is so key here. It's easy to see those patterns in other people,
Yeah.
but recognizing them in ourselves, that's a lot harder.
It is, but it's crucial for having these conversations well. The book even tells a story about a team meeting where afterwards, two coworkers are talking about it, analyzing all the body language and reactions that the leader was totally oblivious to.
Ouch, that's gotta hurt. It's a good reminder that we all have blind spots, especially under pressure. But learning to look for those cues in ourselves and others is essential for creating that safe space for dialogue.
Exactly. And once we've learned to look, the next step is making it safe, restoring dialogue when things start to go wrong.
So what happens when we do notice those red flags? How do we bring a conversation back from the brink of disaster? That's what we'll pick up in part 2 of this deep dive.
So we've learned how to spot those warning signs when a conversation's about to go off the rails, but what do we actually do to fix it?
Right, that's the big question. And luckily, the book doesn't just give us a bunch of red flags and then leave us hanging.
Yeah.
They go into some pretty concrete techniques for making it safe to keep talking even when things get intense.
Yeah, for sure. And one of the most powerful tools they talk about is what they call restoring safety. It's like noticing when the conversations become unsafe, maybe someone's feeling attacked or like they're not being heard, and then taking steps to rebuild that trust and respect.
Okay, so it's like hitting the reset button.
Kind of, yeah.
What are some of the ways to actually do that?
Well, the book talks about three main skills for restoring safety. First, you've got the classic apology.
You know, sometimes I feel like apologies can be a bit weak, like a quick fix that doesn't actually address the problem.
Right, and that's why the book emphasizes giving a genuine apology, one that's focused on repairing any harm done, not just smoothing things over. It's about saying you're truly sorry for any hurt you caused, no matter what your intentions were.
So it's less about saying, I'm sorry you feel that way, and more about owning the impact of your words or actions.
Exactly. It's about taking responsibility and really focusing on the other person's experience. And sometimes a genuine apology is all it takes to de-escalate a tense situation and open up space for a more productive conversation.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about those times when an apology alone isn't enough? Like when there's a big misunderstanding that needs to be cleared up.
Right, that's where the second skill comes in. Contrasting. It's all about addressing those misunderstandings directly, being clear about your intentions, and making sure the other person knows you're not trying to attack them or dismiss their feelings.
So it's about separating intent from impact?
Exactly. You're saying something like, look, I don't mean to say X. What I really mean is Y. You're acknowledging the potential negative interpretation while also being clear about what you really meant.
I get it. And the book had a great example of this, right? Something about a team working late and a forgotten message.
Oh, yeah, that one. A team pulls an all-nighter to get ready for a presentation.
Okay.
But their leader gets pulled into another meeting and forgets to let them know they can go home.
Oh no, I can see that going badly.
Right. But when the team confronts him about it, instead of getting defensive or making excuses, he uses contrasting. He starts by apologizing for the miscommunication, then clarifies his intentions by saying something like, I really appreciate your hard work and dedication. The last thing I wanted was to disrespect that.
That's a really good example. It shows how contrasting can help to restore safety by making it clear that the action wasn't intended to cause harm. It allows for both accountability and understanding.
Exactly. And the third important skill for making it safe is creating a mutual purpose. This is about finding that common ground, moving away from that me versus you mindset,
Right.
and working towards something that benefits everyone involved.
This sounds so important, but also super challenging, especially when you're in the heat of the moment and all those fight or flight instincts are kicking in.
It is, but the book offers a really helpful framework for doing this called SRIB.
SRIB, okay, I like it. Tell me more.
Okay, so SRIB stands for Commit to Seeking Mutual Purpose.
Got it.
Recognize the purpose behind the strategy. Invent a shared goal.
Okay.
And brainstorm new strategies.
So it's really about shifting the focus away from winning or being right and towards finding solutions that work for everyone.
Exactly. It's about acknowledging that you both have needs and goals that are valid, and then working together to figure out a way to meet those needs in a way that feels fair and respectful to everybody.
And the book had an example of this, right? Something about a couple.
Yes. They talk about a couple who are having trouble with their different levels of desire for intimacy. Instead of getting into a power struggle or using guilt trips, the woman uses C-rib to change how they talk about it. She starts by saying that she really wants to find a solution that works for both of them.
So taking a step back from that immediate conflict and looking at the bigger picture of the relationship.
Exactly. And then she takes the time to understand her partner's perspective and the needs that are driving his behavior. From there, they're able to figure out what their shared goal is, in this case, a fulfilling and satisfying relationship for both of them.
Yeah.
And then they can brainstorm ways to actually achieve that.
I love that. It's a really great example of how, even in really personal and potentially volatile conversations, finding that common ground can lead to a better outcome for everybody.
It really shows how powerful these skills can be, even in situations that feel super challenging or emotionally charged.
Okay, so we've got apologizing, contrasting, and creating a mutual purpose. These are all great tools for getting things back on track when things get heated. But the book dives even deeper, right? It gets into how our own internal narratives can actually sabotage our efforts to have good conversations.
That's right. One of the most interesting parts of the book is about mastering our stories, those narratives we tell ourselves to try to make sense of the world and other people's behavior.
So we're talking about those stories we make up in our heads when someone cuts us off in traffic or forgets to text us back.
Exactly. The book goes into how those stories, even though we're often not aware of them, can have a huge effect on how we feel and how we communicate.
Okay, so how do we even start to become aware of these stories? It seems like they're happening on a subconscious level.
It can be tough, but the book offers a pretty simple but powerful process for becoming more mindful of them. The first step is to just notice your feelings. Like when you feel a strong emotion, whether it's anger, frustration, hurt, whatever, take a moment and acknowledge it.
So instead of immediately reacting, we hit pause and check in with ourselves.
Exactly. You ask yourself, what am I feeling right now?
Okay.
And then try to connect that feeling back to the story you're telling yourself about what's going on. What's the narrative playing in your head?
So, for example, if I'm frustrated because a coworker missed a deadline, the story I might be telling myself is that they're lazy or they just don't care.
Exactly. That's a perfect example. And then, once you've identified that story, the next step is to analyze it.
Okay.
Ask yourself, is there any evidence to support this story?
Right.
Are there other explanations that I'm not considering?
So it's about challenging those automatic assumptions and being open to other interpretations.
Right, because often those initial stories we tell ourselves are based on incomplete information or biased perspectives. The book really emphasizes separating facts from stories.
Okay, so what's the difference between a fact and a story?
A fact is something that's objectively true. It's something that two people looking at the same event would agree on. So for example, the project deadline was 5 p.m. today. That's a fact.
Got it. So what's a story then?
A story is how we interpret those facts. It's the meaning we give them, and that's often influenced by our own past experiences, our beliefs, all those things. So the story might be, my coworker missed the deadline because they don't care about this project, or they're trying to make me look bad.
Okay, so the facts are the neutral pieces,
Hmm.
and our stories are the structures we build out of those pieces.
Exactly. And those structures can be really shaky if they're not based on solid fact.
Right. The book talks about a helpful way to tell the difference between facts and stories.
Right.
Something about hot words.
Yes. Pay attention to words that are really emotionally charged. Words like disrespectful, lazy, manipulative, selfish, incompetent, things like that.
Yeah, those are definitely words that can get my blood pressure up.
Totally. And when you notice those hot words popping up in your internal dialogue, that's a sign that you've shifted from objective facts to subjective interpretations.
So you're probably telling yourself a story.
Right.
So the key is to notice those words and then take a step back to examine the story behind them.
Exactly. And once you've figured out what the story is, you can start to challenge it and come up with other ways of looking at things. The book gives a great example of a woman who gets really upset when her boss changes a deadline.
Oh, I've been there. It's easy to jump to conclusions.
Right. So the fact is the deadline changed,
Right.
but the story she's telling herself is that her boss doesn't value her work or that he's setting her up to fail.
And those stories, while they make sense, can really escalate the situation and keep her from having a productive conversation with her boss about it.
Exactly. But by recognizing that those are just stories, not necessarily the truth, she can start to consider other possibilities.
Yeah.
Maybe the client asked for the change.
Mm.
Maybe there were unexpected problems. Or maybe her boss is just trying to manage a complicated project.
Right. That's a great example of how changing the story can completely change how we feel
Right.
and create new opportunities for communication.
Absolutely. And the book also talks about what they call clever stories. Those are the stories we tell ourselves to justify our own bad behavior.
Okay, so what are clever stories?
They're the stories that make us feel good about being right, even if it means hurting the relationship or ruining the outcome we actually want.
So these are the stories we use to avoid taking responsibility or to stay stuck in bad patterns.
Exactly. It's a way to protect our egos or avoid uncomfortable truths. And the book talks about three common types of clever stories: victim stories,
Okay.
villain stories,
Hmm.
and helpless stories.
Okay. I'm already getting a little defensive, but let's break those down. What's a victim story?
In a victim story, we see ourselves as the innocent one who's been wronged by the other person. We make ourselves out to be powerless and blameless, totally at the mercy of the other person's actions. Like, it's not my fault the project failed, my team let me down.
So it's a way of avoiding responsibility for the situation.
Exactly. And the problem with victim stories is that they trap us in a cycle of blame and resentment. They stop us from owning our part in things and finding good solutions.
Okay, what about villain stories?
In a villain story, we basically demonize the other person, making them the bad guy. We give them bad motives, we exaggerate their flaws, and we ignore anything we might have done to contribute to the situation. Like, she's deliberately trying to sabotage my career.
So it's like creating a caricature of the other person,
Uh-huh.
only focusing on the bad stuff,
Exactly. And villain stories might make us feel right or justified for a minute,
right?
but in the end, they stop us from seeing the other person as a complex human being. They shut down empathy and make it impossible to have a productive conversation.
Okay, and what's a helpless story?
In a helpless story, we convince ourselves there's nothing we can do to change things. We feel trapped and powerless, like we have no control. It's like saying, there's no point in even talking to him. He'll never listen.
So it's giving up before you even start.
Exactly. Helpless stories take away our power to do anything and stop us from even trying to make positive changes. They guarantee that nothing will happen.
Wow, these clever stories are tricky. They sound harmless, but they can really mess up relationships and make it hard to communicate.
They can. But the good news is, once we're aware of these stories, we can start to challenge them and choose better ones.
So how do we actually do that? How do we turn those clever stories into something more helpful?
The book suggests turning them into useful stories. Stories that help us take responsibility for our feelings and actions, but also acknowledge the other person's role in the situation.
So it's about finding that balance.
Yeah, finding a story that helps us take action in a way that leads to dialogue and good outcomes. So instead of telling yourself a victim story like, my boss is always picking on me, you could reframe it as, I feel overwhelmed by my workload and need to talk to my boss about setting more realistic expectations.
I see the difference. One keeps you stuck feeling helpless and resentful, while the other gives you the power to do something about it.
Exactly. Or instead of a villain story like, my coworker is incompetent, you could try, it seems like my coworker's struggling with this task. Maybe I can offer some support or clarification.
Again, one shuts down communication and makes things worse, while the other opens up possibilities for working together and finding solutions.
Exactly. And instead of a helpless story like, I can't change the company culture, you could shift to, I can create a more positive and collaborative environment within my own team.
That's a great point. It reminds us that even when we feel powerless, we can always choose how we respond and focus on making positive changes within our own sphere of influence.
That's the key. Mastering our stories is an ongoing thing, but it's a really powerful way to take charge of our emotions, improve our relationships, and get the outcomes we want in life.
It sounds like it's all about self-awareness and making conscious choices. We can't always control what happens to us, but we can control how we think about it and how we respond.
Exactly, and that's what really matters.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
We have.
We've explored why crucial conversations are so hard, how to recognize them, and how to handle them effectively. Any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Just remember, this is an ongoing process. Don't be afraid to mess up. Every conversation is a chance to practice these skills and get better at communicating.
And even small improvements in how we handle crucial conversations can make a big difference in our lives, our relationships, our work, our health, everything. It's definitely worth the effort.
Absolutely.
So to all you listeners out there, keep practicing, keep learning, and keep those mental movie projectors in check.
Happy conversing.
Okay, so we've talked about how to spot when things are going wrong in a conversation, and we've got some strategies for course correction. But the book digs even deeper than that,
It does.
into this fascinating idea of mastering our stories.
Yeah.
Sounds pretty intense.
It is. It's about realizing that the stories we create in our heads about why people do what they do, those stories can really affect how we feel and how we act in conversations.
Okay, so we're not just reacting to what's actually happening. We're reacting to the stories we've made up about it.
Right, exactly. It's like we're all carrying around these internal movie projectors, constantly playing narratives about everyone around us, and those stories color how we see the world, how we understand what's going on, and how we react.
So how do we even start to become aware of those stories?
Sure,
Because it
yeah.
sounds like they're happening on a subconscious level.
It can be tricky, but the book has a pretty simple but powerful process for becoming more mindful. The first step is just to notice how you're feeling. When you feel a strong emotion coming up, whether it's anger, frustration, hurt, whatever, just pause for a second and acknowledge it.
So instead of just reacting, we hit the pause button and check in with ourselves.
Right. You ask yourself, what am I feeling?
Okay.
And then try to trace that feeling back to the story you're telling yourself about what's happening.
Okay, so for example, if I'm feeling frustrated because a coworker missed a deadline,
Yeah.
the story I might be telling myself is that they're lazy or that they don't care about the work.
Exactly. That's a great example. And then once you've identified that story, you analyze it. Ask yourself, what evidence do I actually have to support this? Are there other possible explanations I haven't thought about?
It's about challenging those knee-jerk assumptions and trying to see things from different angles.
Right. Because a lot of times, those first stories that we tell ourselves, they're based on incomplete information or like a biased perspective. The book talks a lot about separating facts from stories.
Okay, what's the difference?
Well, a fact is something that's objectively true, something that two people, if they were observing the same event, they would both agree on. So like the deadline for the project was 5 p.m. today. That's a fact.
Okay, got it. What's a story?
A story is our interpretation of the facts. It's the meaning we give them, often colored by our past experiences, our beliefs, all those things. So the story could be, my coworker missed the deadline because they don't care about this project, or they're deliberately trying to make me look bad.
Ah, okay, so the facts are like the neutral building blocks,
Yeah,
and then the stories are the structure we build on top of those.
exactly. And those scriptures can be pretty shaky if they're not built on a solid foundation of facts.
Right. The book mentioned a tip for recognizing the difference between facts and stories. Something about hot words.
Yes. They say to pay attention to words that carry a lot of emotional weight,
Okay.
like disrespectful, lazy, manipulative, selfish, incompetent, words like that.
Yeah, those are definitely words that can trigger a reaction.
Right. And when you hear yourself using these words, it's a good indication that you've gone from objective facts to subjective interpretations.
You're in story territory.
Exactly.
So the key is to notice those words and then slow down. Examine the story they're part of.
Yeah. And once you've identified the story, you can start to question it, try to find alternative explanations. The book gives a great example of a woman who gets really upset when her boss moves the deadline.
Oh yeah, I can relate to that one. Easy to get worked up about.
Right. So the fact is the deadline was changed.
Okay.
But the story she's telling herself is that her boss doesn't value her work or that he's trying to set her up to fail.
And those stories, even though they make sense, can really make the situation worse, right?
Yeah.
And prevent her from having a productive conversation with her boss.
Absolutely. But just by realizing those are stories, not necessarily the truth, she can start to think about other possibilities.
Right.
Like maybe the client requested the change.
Yeah.
Maybe there were unforeseen circumstances. Maybe her boss is just trying to, manage a really complex project.
Right. That's a great example of how shifting our stories can completely change how we feel and open up new possibilities.
For sure. And the book also talks about something they call clever stories, which are stories we tell ourselves to justify our own bad behavior.
Oh, okay. Interesting. What are those?
Well, they're the stories that make us feel good about being right, even if it means damaging the relationship or preventing the outcome we really want.
So it's a way to avoid taking responsibility or to justify staying stuck in unhealthy patterns.
Exactly. It's like protecting our ego or avoiding uncomfortable truths. And they talk about 3 common types of these clever stories. You've got victim stories,
Okay.
villain stories, and helpless stories.
Uh-oh, I'm already feeling a little defensive.
I know, right?
But let's break them down. What's a victim story?
In a victim story, We make ourselves out to be the innocent one, totally wronged by the other person. We say we're powerless and blameless, completely at their mercy, like, it's not my fault the project failed, my team let me down.
So it's a way to avoid any responsibility for what happened?
Exactly. And the problem is, those victim stories, they keep us stuck in a cycle of blame and resentment. They stop us from taking ownership of our part and finding good solutions.
Okay, so what about villain stories?
In a villain story, we make the other person out to be the bad guy.
Okay.
We assign all sorts of bad motives to their actions, usually exaggerating their faults and ignoring anything we might have done to contribute. So, like, she's deliberately trying to sabotage my career.
So like creating a caricature of the person, focusing only on the negative.
Exactly. And villain stories, they might make us feel righteous or justified for a minute, but they prevent us from seeing the other person as a complex human being.
Right.
They block empathy and make it impossible to have a productive conversation.
Okay, and what's a helpless story?
In a helpless story, we convince ourselves that nothing can be done to change things. We feel totally trapped, powerless, like there's no point in even trying to talk to him and he'll never listen.
So it's just giving up before you even start.
Exactly. Helpless stories rob us of our agency, our ability to act, and they prevent us from even trying to make things better. They're like a self-fulfilling prophecy of, just giving up and staying miserable.
Wow, these clever stories are pretty sneaky. They seem harmless on the surface, but they can do a lot of damage to relationships and our ability to communicate well.
They can, but the good news is, once we're aware of them, we can start to challenge them and choose more helpful narratives instead.
So how do we do that? How do we turn those clever stories into something more useful?
Well, the book talks about turning them into what they call useful stories. These are stories that help us to take responsibility for our emotions and actions while still acknowledging that the other person has a role to play too.
So finding that balance between taking ownership and recognizing the complexity of a situation.
Right. It's about finding a story that helps us move forward in a way that encourages dialogue and positive results. So, like, instead of telling yourself a victim story like, my boss is always picking on me, you could try reframing it as, I'm feeling overwhelmed by my workload and I need to talk to my boss about setting more realistic expectations.
I see the difference. The first one keeps you stuck, feeling helpless and resentful. The second one encourages you to do something about it.
Exactly. Or instead of a villain story like, my coworker is totally incompetent, you could try, my coworker seems to be struggling with this task. Maybe I can offer some support or help clarify things.
Again, one shuts down communication, the other opens up possibilities for collaboration and problem solving.
Exactly. And instead of a helpless story like, there's no way I can change the company culture, you could shift to something like, I can focus on creating a more positive and collaborative environment within my own team.
That's inspiring. It's a good reminder that even when we feel powerless, we always have a choice about how we respond. We can choose to focus our energy on making positive changes in areas we can control.
That's the heart of it. Mastering our stories is a continuous process, but it's an incredibly powerful way to manage our emotions, improve our relationships, and create the results we want in life.
Sound like a journey of self-awareness and conscious choice-making. We can't always control the events in our lives, but we can control how we interpret and respond to them.
Absolutely, and that's where the real power is.
Well, we've covered a lot in this deep dive. We've looked at why crucial conversations are so tough, how to spot them happening, and how to handle them effectively. Any last words of wisdom before we wrap up?
The biggest thing is to remember that this is a lifelong process. It's okay to make mistakes. Every conversation is an opportunity to practice and become a better communicator.
And even small improvements in how we handle these conversations can make a big impact on our lives, our relationships, our work, our well-being, everything. It's worth it.
It absolutely is.
So to everyone listening, keep practicing, keep learning, and keep those mental movie projectors in check. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Happy conversing, everyone.